Can you touch on what you sort of left open-ended on Travis, and that's the difference? I mean, I guess that's what you guys could talk about, the difference between structure that is an organizing principle that's categories, I guess you could say, and structure that is linear structure that is
Okay, welcome to part 2. Yes, welcome to part 2 of the review on the Sharon Tezei, Tov Shin Ayin Vav. So we've managed to get through all of the Ptuchot Stumot. We've noted that there's some really very powerful patterns and some less powerful patterns. The most powerful pattern that we noted, and again, when I say patterns, I mean patterns that are scattered all over the Parsha instead of a logical and organized as per principle structure. So pointed out there's 74 new mitzvot. Many of these mitzvot, many of these sugyas have to do specifically with women. So this was besides the opening parsha of the Yifat Torah. So we have the Ki Yikach Ish Isha U'Boilea, we have Ki Yikach Isha Isha U'Boala, we have Ki Yikach Ish Isha Chadasha. Then of course we have Nara Amurasa, and we have the Ones of a Nara Amurasa. We have Ones, have general of a Nara, not Murasa. We have Motzi Shemra, and the Doran, which also of course are an Isha relationship. And we have the Bu'ula Debal, so that's the Eshet Ish relationship, Yibum, Chalitza, Gerushin, together with Kedushin, Marzik Grushato, like, who? Lo Yigala Knafavi, which is the Shomeret Yavam. We have Psuadaka, Lo Yavom Mamzer. We have the Yisr of wearing Adei Isha. We have the din of Bechor of the Snua. We have Amoni, Moavi, and the difference between Amoni and Moavi. We have the din of Kidesha. We have the Yisr being Maharher Achar Yishav Dishmarta Mikol Davara. We have Etnan Zona, which is brought in the context of Kol Neder, by the way. And that's the mitzvah of Simachat Ishtar Shalakach. We have Zechor Asher Asala Miriam, specifically Beged Almanah, Eshet HaBeit HaChutza, Hirzika B'Mevushav. There's even a drasha, which is fortunate we don't have any women here. Mikan she'en li isha medaberet b'fnei ha'ish. We'll talk about that. And then lo yuchal shalcha kol yamav. We have twice. One by the others, one by the Motzi Shemra. And we have a lot of other patterns, not as very powerful as this, but we had a lot of agricultural inyanim, specifically agricultural inyanim that had to do either with Gedorim of Kilayim, or of people that are working, or have a schus to your peros. So either they have a schus because they're working on your peros, that would include even a shor that has schus to your peros, and the ololos of the karam, and pia of the zayit, and the other matanot that are supposed to be left. And many of the remozim to foodstuffs as well. So the question of whether one is, first of all, how one deals with the people that are working. Got to mention that. And the question of the avodim and the tazkir, even adonav, the tamer, and kilayim in the kerem, kilayim in the sada, kilayim working in the fields. Okay, you get the idea. So I don't want to go over everything again, but the problem was, of course, is that what we found is that things were sort of in a scattershot fashion. So we could not create the type of structures that we would have created. I mean, certainly it would have made a lot more sense on the surface to be able to give a real presentation about the inyan of marriage first. I mean, before we get to the inyan of rape, we can talk about the kikach shisha, we can talk about the organization of we talk about the organization of Kedushin, of Gerushin, of Yibum and Chalitza, which are part of the normal state of affairs, which would have given us essentially Ksuvis, and Yevomas, and Kedushin, and Gittin. And then we could have gone on to a nice organization of the agricultural mitzvahs. And then we could have gone on to a nice organization about the way in which you relate to the people in terms of lending them money, chavala, loans, rebates, whether you're allowed to go into the house to take a chavala. These are all sort of reasonable organizations. And if you spend just 10 minutes or so, you could come up with a lot better organization than the editor did here. I mean, it certainly strikes you that way, right? So one of the keys I think that Chazal provide in giving us the sense of the structure, and that is a din that is specific to the structure uniquely to Sefer Torah. So there we know that generally speaking, actually, you know what, the best place to look for this is in the actual event of the Gemara that just brings it as an agav, you know, but it brings it out so well that, and it's such a powerful story. So we have a story of David HaMelech, a horrible story, in which David HaMelech decided that he was going to worship Avodah Zarah. And the reason that he did this is because he felt he needed to cover for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because since HaKadosh Baruch Hu has made such a mess of David's life, you know, and I mean, what are people going to say? I mean, he sure looks like a tzaddik and a good guy. And then everybody's going to say, you know, this is what happens to someone in this madrega, that his child rebels against him, and he has a ben soror umoreh. I mean, how is it possible that someone of David HaMelech's madrega? So he feels it's a real chilul Hashem. So if HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't care about the chilul Hashem, he'll be mitaken. So he'll go and worship Avodah Zarah. And that way people will say, oh, so you see, he was really a Russia the whole time. He was really worshiping Avodah Zarah. And because of that, they'll feel he got what he deserved, that bum. So he would like to be the bum in order that people shouldn't have tainas on the dinim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yes. Say hello. Oops. See, we don't have anybody in charge anymore. I don't know what happened to Ira tonight. So the Gemara goes like this. It says, "Vayi David ba'ad Rosh asher yishtacha v'shab le'Elohim," and the Gemara brings a raya that that's a reference to Dafka, to Avodah Zarah. And all of a sudden, what happens? So mutav melech shekamoti yargenu b'no mutav yavod avodah zarah v'yitzchal Hashem shameim b'fares. So Chushei Arki is mamish. He's coming running. It has begun him a tour, and he said, "How can you be doing this?" And he explains to them, "Look, I mean, what am I going to do?" So Chushei Arki says to him, "Well, I mean, why'd you marry a fat Torah?" He says, "Well, why'd I marry a fat Torah? God says you're allowed to marry a fat Torah. What's the problem?" He said, "Yeah, but how come you didn't dorish smuchim?" Because the next parsha is Ki Ele Ish Ben Sorer Umoreh. You should have realized that there was a connection between marrying a fat Torah and a Ben Sorer Umoreh. Oh, now all of a sudden everything is clear. I mean, the yesod of this davar becomes nogea hundreds of halachas in Shas, which, as we know, we generally are derish. The fact that a word is next, a pasuk is next to another pasuk, a concept is next to another concept. The truth is, this is a machlok. So Rabbi Yehuda holds we're not derish, except in dvarim. In dvarim, we have to be derish. So what that means is that what we noted before, that there seems to be some type of meta structure in which we don't have the standard suchas and stumes, such that every sedra should begin with a parsha ptucha, which is the norm. Instead, there is a different type of order, and Lamaisa, we know that that order is here merumas in many of the psukim, which is a sense of connectedness that is not causal. There's some type of meta structure. Generally, when we try to deal with rational and what we think is the type of structure that we're used to dealing with in the logical world, so their causality is, that's not the issue. The issue is the connectedness of the conceptual basis. If we're talking about rape, so then rape ought to follow the dinim of marriage. We should know the difference between arusa, between kedusha, the din of gittin, and then we can get to the idea after kedushin. Then there might be a time of mitzi shemra, and what would we do? And then move on to general rape, and what happens if husband diets, move on to chalitza, because they're not, why would it be causal? Here we get this very strange idea of not causality, but some types of strange synchronicity, we can call it in Jungian terms, whatever. But let me just quote you some of the Rashi so that you can see how Rashi takes this as the assault for the structuring of the parsha. So we have, of course, the sofo, which we just brought, is that he's going to have a ben Sorah Moreh. But we also have the immediate parsha afterwards, which is Achat Ahuva v'Achat Tznuah. Says Rashi, Im Nas'a Yifat Sofo Liot Sona, Shedemar Acharav Kitena Tiena Leish. Sofo Lo Limina Ben Sorah Moreh, Lakach Mismechu Parshiot Halalu. And the Ben Sorah Moreh himself is Nerag al Shem Sofo. Im lo chafatzta ba, hakatuv bevasrecha, shesofcha lesanota. So that's the sof dato, is that lesof bechalem amon aviv, umevakesh limudo, etc., etc. So this smichut parashiot is magid shibchasim alav aviv o imo, sof she'etze letarbut ra'a, ya'avar averot, yitchayav mita bebeitin, which is where we have the din of mita immediately afterwards. Im ki tivne bayit chadash, im ki yamta mitzvat shiluach haken, sofcha livnot bayit chadash. And then tekayim mitzvat ma'akeh. That's the din in sofcha. But here he offers a broader sense of mitzvah, goreret mitzvah, and therefore tagia lekerem. And from the kerem you'll begia to a soda. And then you'll have begadim na'im, lekach nispechu parshiat olalu. And v'samla alilat divarim, Avera goreret avera, so avara lotisna, sofo lavolide lashon hara, and that means sofo snei yisharo acharon, akatuv mevasor shesofo lesanota v'imlav kovarato ki yeriv sofam liot nigashim el hamishpat ki yinatzu anashim sofam lavolide makot, and so on and so forth. Right? So there's a very striking idea, which Rashi, because of the striking problem in the parsha, utilizes over here the idea of smuching in new ways. In other words, it's not stam to be doresh, the interrelationship of a din. There's many of that too. So in other words, what are we doing with lo yegale, the knaf aviv here specifically? Because here it has to be somuch to lo yavo mamzer. And comes to teach us that ein mamzer l'michai ve'lavin l'mosh. That's a classic smichas. Not a smichas of this type of meta interrelationship, which is, Rashi doesn't quote that, obviously, because he's going into the sofs. It's not one of the sofs. So, I mean, he talks about it, but in different terms, and we have quite a few of those as well. But they're not part. Yeah, another famous, the Gedilim Ta'aseh. The relationship of Lotachsam Shorpedisho to Malchus, that we have a smicha to Lotachsam to those only a love that's Demel and Lotach. A few of them that we mentioned B'Shas Maisa when we were going through the actual structure. But as I say, those are classical smichas. This is a smichas that speaks of an interrelationship of things on some higher level, some meta level, in which one thing leads to another, and this relates to look, this is the type of smichas that you should have been dorish yourself, which is clearly not a normal of to be dorish smuchim. I mean, you would think that a causal relationship here, sofola volide, which is very emergent, is not going to be strong enough to override the really powerful sidorim of the patterns and the logical structure of the parsha, and yet the idea is that it absolutely does. The sofo here transcends all of these inyanim, and it's because of that sofo, or the idea of smuchim, plays such a tremendous role in devarim in general. Now, one reason for this, of course, is that devarim is meant to be a meta presentation by Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, devarim is not a part of the rest of the Torah. It's completely, which is, the Rishonim point out, it's the reason it does not begin with a vav. There's no ve'ela dvarim, as opposed to every other chumash, of course, other than Bereshit, begins with a vav. It's a continuation. So we have a single narrative. This is Moshe Rabbeinu's Sefer. And he gets up for 36 days and he wants to give us his own perspective and his own take. And once the idea is perspective, perspective by definition does not mean order. Perspective means perspective. In other words, I'm trying to give you how something looks from the point of view of interrelationship that one sees when standing outside, and would certainly be far more complex, subtle, and emergent than the type of relationships that you would find if you're trying to write the Rambam structure, let's say, right? Which he also calls Mishnah Torah, because the din of Mishnah, the concept of Mishnah is Seder. That's the Shisha Sedar. Or what Seder? So if Moshe Rabbeinu is coming to give over Mishnah Torah Hazot, it's with a new provision of things that you would never have seen before. And which is why it's all Tochacha. Tochacha is the Nochachut. I want to show you what it looks like from my perspective. From my perspective, maybe you'll get a chance to see what idiots you are. Because if I just present to you like the ideas and so on, nothing will change. I'm not here to just review it. I'm here to rebuke it. Right? So the redressing, that the itself leads to the concept of rebuke. So if that's the case, it would make sense that we would find these strange interrelationships. We have two interrelationships here, which are certainly not the same. One of them is Sofo Lavo Lidei. Sofo Lavo Lidei is not quite the same as mitzvah goreret mitzvah, Navera goreret mitzvah. The goreret is that it's sort of dragging you, right? It's pulling you. Whereas the Sofo seems to be sort of inertia. In other words, once you've started in this direction, you're going in this direction, this is where you're going to go. Now, I'd like to point out the interrelationships that we have over here to what I think is the meta pattern in the Parsha, which is a play on the central root of the word in the Parsha, which is, of course, called Ki Tezei, and I pointed out to you earlier, Ki Tezei started a long time ago. Because Ki Tezei started in the middle of Shoftim. The real dinam in the Milchama, Ki Tezei la Milchama alo Ilecha, started a long time ago, right? And so for some reason, the idea of Tezei is here. Now, if you consider the way that that is so central in how it is that all of the things are introduced in the Parsha, you begin to get a little suspicious, right? So we start Ki Tezei la Milchama alo Ilecha, Ki Yimatzei Chalal ba'adama. Pishnayim b'chol asher yimatzei lo. Kol avidat achicha shetova b'menu u'mitza'ata, which goes mitzia. Lo matzati la b'tulim. V'samla lilo divarim lo nimtzeu b'tulim l'nara. Ki yimatzei ish shochev. U'matz'a ish ba'ir. V'im basadeh yimtza ha'ish. Ki basadeh mitza'a. Ki yimtza ish nara b'tulah. ושכב עמה ונמצאו, מוצא שפתיך תשמור ועשית, והיה אם לא תמצא חן בעיניו, כי מצא בערוות דבר, כי ימצא איש גונב נפש, סתם, that's the, לקח אבי הנערה ועמה והוציאו, כי הוציא שם רע בתולת ישראל, והוציאו את הנערה בפתח בית אביה, והוצאתם את שניהם אל שער העיר, בצאתכם ממצרים, כי תצא מחנה על אויביך, ויצא אל מחוץ למחנה, ויצאת שמה חוץ, וכיסית את צאתך, what else? ויצאה מביתו והלכה והייתה לאיש אחר, לא יצא בצבא, יוציא אליך את האבות החוצה. So the concept of יציאה here is clearly fundamental to the idea. By the way, one of the most striking things that brings this out is that the Or HaChaim's well-known take on the idea of the Eshet Yifator. So that Eshet Yifator, he recognizes as, and come to explain why this is not just a bunch of romantic kind of thinking, but it's absolutely clear in terms of understanding everything that the Torah is coming to tell us here. So he sees it as the prince on the white steed rescuing the poor princess or the damsel in distress, and he's the knight, and he's coming along to rescue. And who is the damsel in distress? The poor neshama hakidosha that has been captured by the klipot, and that is aching to get out and to become shayach to Yisrael, but has never managed to escape. And because of his extreme level of kedusha, being osik in the mitzvah of the milchama, he has magically focused on this woman who has been shown to him, so to speak, from a higher level of consciousness, and he finds himself strangely attracted to her. The same guy who's going to be makbid on the Isser of Bishmarta Mikol Davara, and he's on a tremendous darga of kedusha, and so on. And so Mamela, he offers her the opportunity to be madbik nafsha to Yisrael. The Mekor for this brings her the Orach Chaim in terms of the Mekor and the Torah, the Kabbalistic Mekor, is the story of Dina and Shechem. So over there we know that there is a remez v'har, it's Rachavat Yadayim, and Rachavat is Rabbi Hanania ben Tradion. And we know that the Nishmat Rabbi Hanania ben Tradion had been devuka to Shechem ben Chamor, and it was only through the relationship to Dina that he was Yotze min HaKlipos. And that's the same idea that we have over here, except in the inverse. There we have the rescuing female, so to speak, who, although she's raped, turns out that that was the purpose of the rape, without even realizing the implications of what he's saying. If you think about the idea, it is fundamentally because it says Vatetsei Dina. And the reason that it's Vatetsei is because Bat Leah, who was Yatzanit, her Yitzia was for purposes of reproduction, specifically, which relates it right back to this. And from there we learn that an Isha who is Mirames, is Tovat, the Elai Tavo, that Elai Tavo was the reason that she was Zocha to Yisachar, and then all of that's the Chamor Gorem, and that becomes, because of the Yatzanit, comes the famous saying, as Chazal tell us, Ki Isha kach bita, that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. She was a Yatzanit, and so her daughter was a Yatzanit. In both cases, it says, Ra'ita ki Tezei, Ra'ita bat shivya isha kifatar, v'chashakta ba. Shechem b'ni chashak nafsho. So we have exactly the same idea of Yitziah, which relates to all of the say words that we've been talking about. Now, if we recognize that the flow has been, we introduced this a while back, because the Rambam introduces it in Ilchos Teshuvah, that the yesod of the Torah that essentially relates us to this period of the year, and we'll see why this parsha is so fundamental according to the Zohar to this period of the year. The idea that relates us is that it starts with Re'eh and ends with Re'eh next week. So the Re'eh natati lifnechem, and Re'eh, there's the bracha v'klalav natati lefanecha. Those two things represent the Arboim Yom of Chodesh Elul, essentially of the Aliyah, all the way through from the beginning of Chodesh Elul to the end of Yom Kippurim, which is why we complete the story with women again, of course, naturally. That's the dancing Bochur, Re'eh Mata Bochelecha, which starts the process on Tu B'Av of Tikkun, ends the process on Yom Kippurim, and which somehow can't be coincidentally just related to the idea of all of the mitzvahs that bring us from one Re'eh to the other to be related to women. But let me point out that just to remind you, not point out, but to remind you that our understanding of the opening of Re'eh and the centrality of why it says Re'eh is to give the deeper understanding of the Ramban's approach to Har Grizim and Har Eiva, which we understood, we found out was really the Rambam's makor for the concept of la'atot et atzmo and so on. And that is, the Ramban argues on Rashi. It says it can't argues on the Targum. It cannot mean that the habracha means et ha-mevarchaya, because there weren't any mevarchaya yet until we get later on to Kitabon. And therefore, it has to mean that choice requires a sense of directionality. So you need to be able to see a path that leads, and that there's a bifurcation caused by a minimal distinction in the opening of the path, so that if the coordinates are slightly different, then they end up becoming in space, geometrically, massively separated into two completely different worlds, which is how you need to see Arguzim and Arival, which is the way the Rambam introduces the concept of Rishos. Not that a person can choose to be a tzaddik, and not that a person can choose to be a Rosh, but a person chooses, and we related it to the idea of perhaps a actual physical mechanism, which is very tantalizing. How is it possible? Because the idiots who try to analyze these things confuse choice with decision. So there's never been a single experiment to deal with brain function and choice. So it's all about decisions, which obviously the brain knows what you decided before you do, and because decisions is a default animal, which is called hechrea. The hechrea takes place in brain cells before you're aware of it, as is always the case. Any fool could have told you that before they did the experiments. So the question over here is that the relationship to being able to stand above yourself and to choose seems to be dependent on quantum entanglement. This was the suggestion of Penrose years before it was known that evolution actually makes sense of quantum entanglement in many ways. One of the most striking ways is Re'iyah. So you cannot have the Re'iyah that we have, the level of efficiency of both photosynthesis and Re'iyah requires an astonishing usage of quantum effects, because in classical physics, you can't possibly get that level of it's a 99% efficient translation into energy once an electron is knocked out. And so on. I mean, there's a number of examples that come to light, but the important point is that the Rambam's idea goes hand in hand with the Ramban, which is he can only be la'atot et atzmo, such that in the end lihiyot tzaddik, which was the idea of sofo, or la'atot atzmo l'derech ra'ah, and at the end lihiyot rasha. But there's no direct choice of what you are. There's a path out of which things emerge, which very much relates to the sofo lit that we have over here. But what that requires, by definition, is not simply directionality. It's obviously that directionality demands of you that you see this in a spatial perspective, because otherwise it can't be the geometric sense. So you need to have that spatial vision. But what's important is that in order for it to be choice and not decisions, it needs to be a space that allows you a fulcrum to be able to choose from outside your normal three-dimensional space, because otherwise you're stuck with a Gödel problem. From within the system, you can't possibly do something that could affect the value of MS or sheker within the system itself. So because of that, Re'eh is mechayev you to have the perspective that allows you, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to Avram Avinu, which is Vayotzi Oto Achutza, which is say one of our first says, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu actually takes Avram Avinu, takes him out so that now he can look down at himself, which becomes in Yaakov Avinu the essence of his darga, which is the dream in which he sees himself from the outside, and his work on the Sulam. And that means that we were focusing truly on Re'eh twice, from one level of Re'eh to the other level of Re'eh, from Re'eh to Kitavo. Once we understand that, then the entire parsha begins looking completely different. Because remember that this is not just, people like to think about a metaphor of space. It's like a conceptual space. They'll call it conceptual space, without realizing that mathematically speaking, conceptual space is the metaphor, whereas in reality, the number of dimensions that are open to you terms of space, reach an absurdity of what's known as phase space, where entire structures can be embedded as one coordinate in a complex space, which then includes an insane amount of information in what appears to be a simple set of coordinates. Now, the implications of such a thing in terms of Re'eh are very important, because the getter of the smuchim means that if I'm talking about the way in which it is possible, without even realizing it, to enter into a completely different reality without even recognizing that you are now not where you were, in an actual world in which a mitzvah is goreret mitzvah, which normally we'd say was psychologically mitzvah goreret mitzvah. I mean, we don't find that psychologically that's the issue. And in reality, there's tremendous nafkaminas as to when that would work. So let me read to you a medrash in which you can understand how complex this is. The 6. Yeah, but I needed to start from before. So, says Rabbi Bar Khan, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Lo teyoshevu b'shakel b'mitzvotav shel Torah. Now that started in Ekev. Ekev means the mitzvot that you're dash ba'akev, because you don't consider them to be important. They're mitzvot kalot, and that's how we begin this. So that's the first time that we ended up without a ptucha, and from then we've been going without a ptucha until next week. So over there it says, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Lo teyoshev v'mishakel b'mitzvotea shel Torah, and that's, you shouldn't think, oh, a mitzvah zu gdola, I want to do that one, sheschara merubah, this is mitzvah kala, I'm going to do this one. And therefore, ma'asa HaKadosh Baruch Hu, lo gila lebriot ma'o matat schara, shel kol mitzvah. Mitzvahs, you'll never know which mitzvah is important, more important than another mitzvah. The makor of this is the pasuk, no ma'agalotea lo teda. Now, no ma'agalotea lo teda is a reference to a completely different idea. Of no ma'agalotea means that when you have complex interacting orbitals, it is almost impossible, and ad hayom, no one has a clear-cut vision of the mathematics of the solar system, because it's simply too many interacting elements for us to be able to actually 100% predict that a planet is not going to be thrown out of its orbit by the multiple effects of its multiple passings too close to the effects of a combination of Mercury and Jupiter, even it being in one place which slightly adds to gravity, et cetera, et cetera. It's insanely complicated when you have so many bodies that are all interacting with each other. So the no ma'agalotea means you keep going round and round in ways that are simply too much for you to be able to figure out. And you can get some general sense of emergent properties in which you believe there's a certain stability, but you can't figure out where it comes from. So the same thing is true about the mitzvah satira, which is a strange pasuk to bring here, but it's a reference again to the meta-level interactions that are not part of the linear structures that we would be looking for. So it gives us a marshal that is outrageous. The marshal is to a melech that has a pardes. He wants to hire poalim. He hires poalim, and he does not tell them what things he likes in the pardes, right? So everybody's supposed to go ahead and take care of like different parts of the pardes. Then after all the work that's done, and they all come in for their work, they say, okay, so what were you working on? So I was working on this. And, so let's say the guy gets $50 for his work. Somebody else comes in, the guy's right there, and he says, what did you do? I worked on that. Oh, you get $100. The guy turns around and says, wait a minute, why don't you tell me that working on that gets me $100, right? Well, if I would have told you, nobody would have worked on that, right? So I don't want to tell you. I mean, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't tell us to schar the mitzvahs because we'd all go running to the mitzvah that's very valuable, and then who's going to do the other mitzvahs? You can understand this is pretty atrocious, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu's playing games with us, so we can spend our whole life on the wrong mitzvah, and then not get the kind of schar we would have. But after all, I mean, what can you do? The world requires it, so life isn't fair.
Supply and demand, nobody would have done what housing is really.
Okay, whatever is wrong with the metaphor. Okay, so then it ends with something that seems to contradict what it just said. So, kach lo gila Kadosh Baruch Hu matan scharan shel mitzvot chutz mishtei mitzvot, which also very surprising. With shtei mitzvot, hachamura shebechamurot, v'hakala shebekalot. So the one hand, v'kibud ava'im, is called mitzvah chamura shebechamurot. What's matan schara? V'harachta yamin. Olam shekulo arov. Yizochet olam haba. Okay, that's one. The other one is right here in our parsha. Hakala shiluach hakein. Ma'u schara? Same exact words. V'harachta yamin. Shenemar shariach t'shalach adaim. Yikar kan tzipor. So I mean, understand, if the point is that every mitzvah is different and you'll never know, then why are you asserting that the lowest of all mitzvahs and the most chomer of all mitzvahs basically bring you to the same end? Now, what was even the point of saying it? That the only two places where we are told, then it's the same. And it's bedavka kasha b'kavod. It's really weird. Right? Now, speaking of Reb Chananya ben Tradia, this is an insight into the entire nature of the two issues that are involved over here, which is this concept of the mitzvah goreret mitzvah in the sense that it can draw you into a space of mitzvahs. And this is a Gemara. The Gemara says that there's a steer. On the one hand, it says in the pasuk, Gadol ad shamayim chesed. Chesed of Hashem goes all the way up to the sky. The other pasuk says Gadol me'al shamayim chesed, which means that it's above the sky. How do you explain that? Answers the question. No kasha. One is talking about asiya lishma, which is me'al shamayim. One is talking about asiya shalo lishma. So again, this strikes you as being a sort of quantitative problem. How high do you get? However, if you remember the Rambam's raya from the very Reb Chananya ben Tradion, whose nefesh comes out of haaretz richavat yadayim, which of course is a spatial issue itself, then you will remember that the Rambam in the Pirush HaMishnayos says that what we can prove from Reb Chananya ben Tradion is that indeed, though it is true, as the Mishnah Nova says, Hosem mitzvah achat is nochel et haaretz, and so on. Right? So he gets into Olam Haba for one mitzvah. The meaning of Ratzak Kadosh Baruch Hu lezakot et Yisrael leficha chir b'lehem Torah mitzvahs is not, we've learned this 100 times, but we'll go over it again, is not that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives you lots of opportunities to get additional brownie points to be able to get to Olam Haba. It's rather, since you need to do one mitzvah in the course of your life to be able to get to Olam Haba, and that mitzvah needs to be done in order to get to Me'al Hashemayim Chasdeh. You need to enter into a completely different space. If you do that mitzvah with your own assumptions attached to the mitzvah, then you don't get into a different space. Then there only remains to Ad Hashemayim Chasdeh. But if that's the case, you will never enter into the space of mitzvah, in which case you will never be Zochet Olam Haba. Therefore, in order to be Mezaka Es Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives you so many mitzvahs that you're bound to accidentally bump into one of them, where you don't know anything about it, and you finally do a mitzvah for no reason, other than the fact that it's a mitzvah. Whereas everything else you have a whole religious get up and go for, which therefore doesn't count. So those are the two mitzvahs that we're talking about over here. The mitzvahs that you are doing because they're part of your vision of reality, and that's the getter of Parshas Ekev. Hinochinami, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to tell you what's he going to tell you? This one is the one that's worth the most. So then you won't do mitzvahs. Then you're only going to do it because it's worth the most. At least like this, there's a chance that you'll bump into a mitzvah and it'll really be a mitzvah. That's the worst thing I could possibly do. Is I'll tell you this mitzvah I really care about. Oh, so that's the one that I'm going to do. And therefore, it's the very reason that you won't be zocheh to the mitzvah. Because you're doing it because you think this is the mitzvah I care about. It's exactly the same thing. Anything where you get this whole religious Torah background of, this is a very chashuv mitzvah because X, Y, Z. That's the reason that it destroys the mitzvah. Because then you do the mitzvah because you think you understand that I'm doing exactly this. This is why there was so much hitnagdut to the hineni muchanim zuman and so on. That hineni muchanim zuman destroys the mitzvah. So because of that, the Rambam says, my raya is Reb Chananya ben Teradyon. What's Reb Chananya ben Teradyon? That after giving up his life to be burned in a Sefer Torah, which Rabbi Yossi told him, I'll bet that's what's going to happen to you. So he says to Rabbi Yossi, you think I'm Zeichet Olam Haba? And Rabbi Yossi says, I don't know, did you ever do something with Klum Maaseh Bali Yadecha? Something just came your way? So he remembered some silly Maaseh that came his way. He took money out of his wallet and he put it together with the money for the Purim. Crazy story. Oh, says Rabbi, amazing. Then you've got amazing Olam Haba. Now everything is clear. So therefore, the two inyanim over here have, one of them in our parsha shares the remarkable fact, it's the only mitzvah in the Torah, that is ki yikarei kan tzipor lefanacha, which is klum maaseh bali yadecha. It's the only mitzvah which, if you plan it, literally ceases to be a mitzvah. Right? So you say, okay, you know what I'm going to do? Buy some birds. Oh, so then you're not a mitzvah shiloh haken, because it's only ki yikarei, and not if it's matzah already. Unbelievable. So what that means is that if you have that mitzvah, or the mitzvah of kibbud av v'em, where the essence of the mitzvah is that you have to be doing this because the father or mother needs it, and it has nothing to do with your needing it. So then by definition, unless you're doing it as Esav or as one of the goyim that are always used to signify for that reason kibbud av v'em, because for them it becomes an exercise of their own morality. But in doing it in terms of kibbud av v'em, which is the chomer shebachamurais, it will always not be with a cheshbon other than, since this is what dad needs, so this is what I'm going to do. But that's what the mitzvah is. So then it becomes the ki yikarei. Those two mitzvahs, they take you into arichas yomri because they've moved you into a space in which la'olam shekulo aroch. The idea over here that what we're talking about is a space. And the interrelationships between the space are brought out strangely with a very weird puzzle. So we learn ki yeshvu achim yachdav. What is the meaning of ki yeshvu achim yachdav? Yachdav ba'olam echad. This is a weird thing. Yachdav ba'olam echad. We live in the same world. What they're going to make? No, did you just say that he was born during his lifetime? No, that's not the point. The Torah of Yibum is Eshet Ach Shelo Haya Ba'olamo. Can you imagine what a strange way of saying that is? Shelo Halacham Moto. I mean, what does that mean, Shelo Haya Ba'olamo? Until you learn the second one, what is the words don't make sense. He was not in his world, he lived in some other world. So in other words, that idea of the extension of space that includes both of them is absolutely essential in order for the mitzvah to be chalbah. As in every spatial description, right? There's always been, up until Einstein, the question of the insane coincidence of inertia having to do with exactly the same measurement that gravity has. It's like an unbelievable coincidence. Why in the world would mass be able to be measured by weight? Because it's affected by gravity, and that would end up becoming exactly the same function for describing inertia. Like, what does one have to do with the other? Right? It was like this, what are these weird mysteries about, why does Planck's constant show up in time measurements that have nothing to do with quantum mechanics and so on? I mean, that's crazy. How did pi get there? Those kind of questions. There's another one of these mysteries. Obviously, once Einstein came along, redefined gravity as basically the impact on an inertial field, essentially is what it boiled down to. So then we understood that we were looking at two phenomena that related basically the same idea. Inertia is sopho-le, right? That's what inertia means. You start off here, you're going to continue in this direction. Gravity is goreret. It appears to be a force that pulls you. So then that means that the elements that define, remember, again, once upon a time, the Newtonian idea of an absolute space or an absolute time just made sense to people. After it became clear that the space is a specific relationship between the objects within the space, then the question of mitzvah goreret mitzvah means that the objects within that space relate to the gravitational idea that we sense in three-dimensional space, and that a mitzvah actually draws you in a particular direction of objects of mitzvah. So that the sopho is the idea of the overall structure of the directions that you've chosen. And we'll see how that has so much to do with the parsha. And the nigreret has to do with the specific points, which we could pretend gravity is a point as well. The points which HaKadosh Baruch Hu identifies to us in the Torah, these are the things that integrate essentially all of that mess, and they are the things that will warp the world around it to draw you in that direction. But the nafkamina is, if you're talking about doing the mitzvahs that you're doing because you're looking for what to do with your life, and these are mitzvahs that are chashuv, they have nothing to do with the whole story of mitzvah goreret. Because therefore they have nothing to do with the story of Olam Haba, because that's the raya for Reb Chanani ben Tradun, says the Rambam. The moment that we take these two mitzvahs, I can show you the difference. You want to know a mitzvah that's going to lift you up and bring you into a world that you have no idea was there. That's me'ala shamayim. That's where you have thrown yourself in. It's basically the difference between ta'ava and cheshek. That's the difference. So the ta'ava is the simple competitive and Darwinian implications of the mechanisms that will fool you into depositing your genes somewhere. Cheshek is an investment in something that is personal, intimate, and visionary. I'm throwing myself into this. I want this. And that's what he talks about, chashkan nafsho b'dina bitrem. And therefore it was capable of taking that nishmas Reb Chanani ben Tradun, which is what happens here as well. So that means that the Tezei element, when it comes to war, is an expression of the same idea as the concept of smuchin, or the concept of the recognition of these broader, unbelievable kochos, in which by bringing that yifastar into this type of situation, I am creating something that's entirely different for her and that allows her neshama to actually discover itself. So that would be the mashal and so on. Okay. Now.
That's a question if it's not there.
Yeah, but it might be a little premature because this is like an introduction to the.
Right. So if it's not, then.
Okay, fine. Yeah, so, yeah. Let me.
The Harafta Yom is the schar for the mitzvahs. Is that correct?
Yes, but in a totally different way than the idea of the $50, $100, and so on. And that's why it's not a steer. So the $50, $100 is not a spatial. Olam she. I think that word olam shkalaro is the equivalent of eshtatim shloya bo'olamo. That's the idea of re'eh. So what world are you in? Are you in a world of mitzvah? Are you in a world of avera? You are in a world in which the entire space is defined by taiva and so on, right? Masha Inkain, these specific mitzvahs that allow you to be me'ala shamayim, they'll always be the same. Now the question within, once you've entered that space, the shaykhs to the pu'ula, in other words, the difference between being a ben olam haba and schar in olam haba. There's two completely different things, which the Rambam focuses on constantly. In Hilchos Shuvah. That's exactly what the Medrash is pointing out. These are the mitzvahs you can be sure have lifted you up to becoming alive. Once you become alive, then your choices within that space are memela going to be different. which is why the Rambam keeps talking, because tshuva also about sof, right? So that's the Kadesh Yamut V'Upal Tshuva. Sof Yisrael, B'Sof Galutam, to be Chozeh B'Tshuva. That's also defining the type of space that you live in, which provides a guarantee of sofa lit. And it's exactly this type of thing. If you do your life with some type of intellectual commitment or desire to achieve a particular thing, then there's absolutely no reason to think that it's going to happen. It may happen, it may not happen, but it's entirely chaotic. The type of vision that allows for this type of structure is where the spatial characteristics, putting that into terms that people are used to because they generally don't see anything. That's the problem. In other words, you need to be able to be a re'eh in order to make this conscious as opposed to intellectual. But you can imagine, if I translate the conscious determination into the intellectual, you can understand that if you have defined for yourself the context of your life and a vision of the entirety of what it is that you want to achieve, that it's much more likely that there will be all types of subliminal effects that will end up, without you needing to think of it, creating defaults that will push you in that direction. Whereas if you're leaving yourself open to chaotic effects, and every once in a while you think about, well, I'd like it to go that way, then there's no reason to believe it's going to go that way. And you end up, waking up 40 years later and you haven't done a damn thing. That's the typical experience. Turn that into an actual achievement of consciousness and awareness, which is always experienced as a field in space. And it becomes much, much more powerful because it's as if you live in a different world. And therefore, the things that other people may find exciting don't even exist for you because they're not part of your cheshek, they're not part of your wave, they're not part of your reactions to the world. You have absolutely no interest in it. Right? So it becomes a completely different way to live once it's a function of re'iyah. That was the point that we made in re'eh. Over here, the fact that there is inertia that's created by space that makes it a sof is so much part of our experience within three-dimensional space that it's a wonderful way for the Torah to present it. The idea of direction, which relates, of course, to kavanah, kivun, and that's the direction in which you're taking. The direction which you're taking ultimately is a spatial thing. Okay? So that's two different things. Then you have to decide about those choices within your life as a ben Olam Haba, which, of course, the Ein Adam Rayas Chaver Olam Haba, there's different realities, but different realities within that same universe. You have different realities within our universe. Some people live type of life X, and some people live miserable life in which it looks like the same X, but it's awful, and so on and so forth. You can have a chelek in Olam Hazeh, and it's very different. The way you relate to your chelek, the way somebody relates to their chelek, and the size of that chelek, and what you are in that chelek, these are all different nakudas. Obviously, it's exactly the same on any level of beings. If you're talking about a chelek to Olam Haba, doesn't mean you're a ben Olam Haba. Right? And it doesn't mean what that chelek is, and it doesn't define you and your ability to relate to that chelek. It's a lot of good giving a dog a wonderful doghouse in Olam Haba. That could be your chelek, so to speak. So again, these are complex notions. But what the Medrash is pointing out is don't confuse the two. Because if you're talking about the spatial idea of mitzvah goreret, and you're talking about a mitzvah lifting up to you into a world in which now, and this happens to us, but it happens to us only with cheshek. It does not happen with taiva, for the very simple reason that taiva is a Darwinian trick. So the idea of taiva is that you are being manipulated by external reality and not that you are choosing anything that has to do with yourself. You're simply allowing your body to play tricks on you. That's all that's happening when it's taiva. But the engagement that is defined by cheshek is by definition passionate. Over there, that passion can uplift what initially may not look very nice, which makes no difference because sofo lit. And the moment that the passion is lost, then the very thing that was good before becomes bad. That's what happened with David. Because Tamar is born from Maacha, who he rapes in the field. Bishas passion. So she becomes the one who upholds Tznius in Yisrael and who's most nefesh to go around to create the din of Yichud. Avshalom is born from the woman after she becomes his wife. Domesticity, the end of love, the end of passion. Boom. Ben Sorero More. Right? No, this is no joke. I mean, it's unbelievable. So it's fully the instrument of passion that works here. And this has to be understood in a much deeper way. And what is that deeper way? It's the Tezei milchama. The Tezei milchama itself, which seems to be here almost, like a background. Okay, how did you get to this Eshet Yifatar? Because you were Yotzei in a milchama, and you happened to win, right? But remember, the entire original idea of Piria Verivia in the Torah is presented with Revuva V'Kifshua. Now, V'Kifshua means to successfully subdue. That successful subduing, which we have to understand, subdue what? For what? Is directly related to reproduction because our raya that a woman is not chayevet in Piria Verivia is from the fact that ein darka shel isha lifbosh. So a woman is not normally kovesh. On the simple level, that means it's not kovesh. She doesn't go out to war because ein darka latzeit la milchama. The deeper way, some of the Rishonim point out, is that a woman can't rape you because she needs your erection, which you're going to have to give her. And that's ein kishrei l'ladas. So she cannot be kovish. But that means that the idea of kfisha is by definition a sexual terminology. And therefore, not surprisingly, relates to every last aspect of war. War is essentially a definition of how you relate to sex. That's all that it's about. So exactly. So a goy is not shaykh to kibush. He has no shaykhs to kibush at all. Lav b'nei kibush lino, which creates all kinds of halakas. L'gabe avodim, which is what we're talking about over here, and your rights to an evidence, and capturing areas in war, and so on and so forth. Right. The reason that he's not a ben kibush is because to him, kibush means what it does to Christianity. It is the dirty word of the 20th and 21st century. So the very fact that God gave us the world to subdue, that's the way they understand it, is what has led to the destruction of the earth, because man has begun to believe that after all, God said we're the boss, so we do whatever we want to do, and we make use of whatever we want to make use of, as if we're talking about the Rephaim, which is the essence of the Mabul, which was the opposite of Kibush. So the mitzvah of Kibush, therefore, according to Chazal, is given only in the context of the famous medrash about HaKadosh Baruch Hu first taking Adam Rishon in his hands and saying, look, I need you to see this world. He used the word re'eh. Re'eh kol ma shabarati. I want you to take a look and see everything I created b'shvilcha barati. Why b'shvilcha barati? Because, gentlemen, this is not a question of an egocentric vision of reality. It's b'shvilcha barati simply because the entire thing is a virtual reality. And therefore, it only exists in your head for all intents and purposes. So somebody who looks outside the window and sees a beautiful world and makes the ridiculous assumption of, I am looking at a direct perception of reality, which is absolutely insane because you have no access or no reason to believe that anything that's going on in your brain is an actual one-to-one relationship to some external reality. And therefore, it's a given because it's a reality. So it provides an interesting background for what I want to do. So what do I want to do? I want to have fun. Oh, look at that pretty girl. That's the taiva, not the cheshek. And so on and so forth. I want to go out to the movies and have some pizza. Someone who looks at the world and says, oh my God, this thing doesn't make any sense at all other than as a format for me to evolve. I mean, there's nothing else that's here. So because of that, it's going to be entirely defined by the way in which I'm going to relate to it. And there is nothing else. So obviously, that's the first message law. You see all of this? Looks beautiful, doesn't it? Because your brain evolved here, you jerk. So because of that, kol ma shebrati b'shvilcha barati. Now, if you mess this up, I guarantee you I ain't coming to fix it. So ein mi sheyavo acharecha letaken. Because this is entirely your world. Now you do what you want. So in that context, what is the kibush? It's the terraforming of a virtual reality to be a place suitable for humans. Now, when you terraform, it's always on a made-up reality. You don't do landscaping on Mars to turn it into something that is usable. You would have to provide the ingredients that allow a sofa. In terms of an olam that is suitable for humanity, so where is your agency of war? Your machaneh. Vaya machanecha kadosh. Because the point of your machaneh is the turning of taiva into cheshek. The point of the goyim's machaneh is to rape, pillage, and make use of desire. This is brought out in so many wonderful places. So the mocker of war for us is Benos Midian and the struggle of Pinchas. And the idea, the first war that we fight, the creation of Mashuach Muhammad, is about sex. Its initial attack is a sexual attack, where women were Yotze. We deal with it in terms of bringing a kapara for you, which is the Vayam Machanecha Kadosh. Which means that the essence of machaneh for Yisrael, we can't even go to the bathroom, is only in war. I mean, we live in Yerushalayim Yirah Kodesh. How come we have bathrooms in our homes? What a bizoyin. I mean, they had the machaneh was Keneged Machaneh Yisrael. You had to walk Shtein Mil Keneged Machaneh Yisrael in order to go to the bathroom, because that's the Kedusha of war. The Kedusha of war is the act of kibush, where you are going out to terraform the earth. At that moment, it's transformed into the Machaneh of the Midbar. And you become B'kerev Machanecha. And you become, make sure, I mean, this can't be part of you. This has got to be gotten on B'kerev Machanecha. It's got to you got to get it out of here, right? So that's why all of the mitzvahs over here are Bi'ar Torah Mikirbecha. If you want a world, you can't have this kind of thing. What do you understand? You want to have a neighborhood in which you have mad rapists in the neighborhood? That's what you're talking about. There's a neighborhood that will tolerate this? I mean, obviously, it will be our Torah Mikir Bechas. If you don't care what kind of world that you live in, forget it. So you don't have a machaneh. So there's no kibush. So the entire essence of the kibush, take a look at the amazing interrelationship of that kivush with Pirya Verivia, because that's mamish the boker of kivush. That's where we learn it. It's put together with the mitzvah of lifrot v'libot, this vikiv shua. That becomes here an isser of mutilated genitals. What do I care? But that's the whole point. The whole point is that I'm engaged in terraforming that has to do with a vision of where I intend my genes to end up. So far, you think I'm going to pick some crazy nutty blonde because she turns me on? That's private. That has nothing to do with my kibush. My kibush is cheshek. What do you want cheshek for? That means, what do you want to see in the world? What type of world do you want to build? So I'm going to choose the kind of person that will allow me to conceive 1,000 years in the future what the children would be like who would continue along this path. And each time take another step further. It's a different reality. Whereas these go, and all they're interested in is more and more fun, more and more opportunities, less and less freedom. So it becomes an ultimate milchama, which here becomes metabolic, which is genital. That's my point. It's not a game. I'm going to yes, it's fun. Oh, going. Celebrate sexual victory. Anyway, around with the penis there and around their belt. So it wasn't. This was the five shots house with Shmuel, God. Right? Exactly what they're doing. So this is what the understand. The point is that this is the showing of my power, and that's what goes right back to the king's. It's not a sexual act, it's a keyboard, it's a shlichta which expresses itself always sexual. So here our Milchamas, look at the unbelievable. You want the Milcham, this beautiful Milcham. It's the Milcham of Torah. How do we victory? What's the victory? Turning the sexual madman who becomes the marker of our Tkiyas and Rosh Hashanah, right? It is unbelievable. You take Sisra, oh, my wonderful son. I mean, the filthy language that she uses, let's make sure we got plenty of pussy for all of these boys' penises. I mean, that's literally what she says in the pussy. Racham Rachmatayim L'Rosh Hashanah, it's nauseating. This is a tremendous 100 kilos. They become now Keneged the Tkiyah Shefer. And Dvorah, and what does she do? I don't like these penises. Bifra Praot. Bris Milah is not good enough the way you're doing it. What happened to Priya? You're not doing the mitzvah of Priya properly. This is a coincidence, you believe? That they're both talking about genitals in the Shiraz Dvorah? That over here the pagam of Petzuadaka is a pagam that comes before Mamzerut, which is a pagam in DNA. This is a pagam in direct genitals. So the interrelationship of your commitment to the process of kivush is fundamentally translating what was initially the world using you as a vector to play games with you so that you can mess up your life by marrying a person who's completely wrong for you, to make sure that we get your genes out there somewhere so that your kids and grandkids can spit at you and take all your money. And so, I mean, this is the vision of reality. Why would it have to do with any type of cheshik and clarity and understanding of where things are going? It's horrific. Look where it's going. It's mamish, it's frightening. Which there's not even any more a belief that it's meaningful or could be meaningful or is meant to work. It's not meant to work. Everybody figures it's a joke. Okay, what can you do? Well, what am I going to do? I'm going to fight it. You can't fight nature. It's unbelievable. And this vision goes all the way back to Maaseh Bereshis. What is humanity here for? That's the Vikivshua. So Mamela, in that context, all of the elements of kibush become central. That's why rape is so important over here. More important than the relationship of the actual Kedushin and Gerushin, because it's going to define your relationship to kibush and why we need, those are all the mitzvahs in which it says, we are not interested in citizens who own snakes. We're interested in citizens who own penises. That's the difference. So as far as the reptilian level of life in which we see that world out there, which is totally reptilian, no interest in it. I don't enjoy it. I don't want it. It's a destruction of my machane. To me, my machane has no room for fantasizing, because that just gives an opportunity to the snakes out there. We don't like snakes. So the idea of kivush is this unbelievable attention to the construction of society on every level, to the integrity, not only of the human relationships, but of the animals that will be used. the plant material that will be used, the vision of the support of an animal. The din of Tsar Balei Chaim comes from here, of the Vehitalamta Meya. And by the way, that's the explanation for Hitalamta. Because in not participating, you actually disappear from that space. You're not part of it. So when you say you won't notice, I won't notice. But in reality, within that space, you blank out of existence. You're mitalem, you disappear. Because you're not there. You have no connection to this. So every last aspect of where things, and this is why the Orach Chaim is right on target, because the concept of there being something real inside the things that are very not real is such a profound sense of responsibility for the world. You think you're looking at something that is utterly filthy and that is nothing but Shem ben Chamor. I mean, what a name. Right? It's exactly the words that we use here to talk about the chiyuv of taking care of animals. And it turns out, if he has cheshek for this world, there's got to be something amazing about it. Why in the world would Shem ben Chamor be turned on by Dina Bas Yaakov? It's like, it's crazy. Why doesn't he want a typical whore, a movie star? I mean, why would he want someone that looks the beauty of Tsanua, the astonishing subtlety of the nefesh, and the real tzura of Abbas Yisrael? But how is that possible? There's got to be something amazing about it. That's the point. And it's exactly the same over here. This is real. And when Klal Yisrael goes around the world and identifies in every society the most beautiful music, the most wonderful creativity, the most amazing writing, the perfection of language. In every different society, they have picked up that which is most marvelous and absorbed it as the Eishes Yefastaya. This is an amazing story. So this sense of kivush and milchama is part of the entire idea over here in which the Machana Midbar, this becomes the Matovu Alecha, which we thought also was a joke. Matovu Alecha, because your windows don't face each other, a little bit of zoning laws, that's Matovu Alecha, precisely. It's the concern for that type of subtlety that creates a Machana in which even, but this is crazy, Noam says, who cares about things like privacy and not looking in and minding somebody else's business and so on? That's exactly what human beings care about. That's exactly what nobody that you know cares about. And that becomes Nein Am Levadad Yishkon, a vision of a completely different reality of what it means to be human. And I mean, you mamish see this in so many different kufas of Yisrael, and the difference between the society of Yisrael and the society that surrounds them. This is, and it is actually Rabbi Sachs wrote an article, I think this year, last year. If you take a look, the bottom line struggle in every one of the others was sexual. Every single one has to deal with the ultimately Kamais Eretz Canaan or Kamais Eretz Mitzrayim. So it's, whether it's in terms of Avimelech or whether it's in terms of Paro and Sarah and so on, this becomes the entire idea. This is not like some small issue. It's the question of whether you remain Darwinian Nivroim or you have become something that is completely beyond and has learned the meaning of true kibush and of all of these aspects of the totality of a kivshua that brings you into Mamish Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh. That's the Tezei. So because of that, the extension of the concepts of kivush is directly into the idea of language, of psychological warfare. It started with psychological warfare last week. We talked about how absurd the psychological warfare issues are, that we need 4 separate mitzvahs to deal with 4 separate psychologies in terms of how you respond to the noise that they make, the animals they make, the trisim that they bang. I mean, it sounds ridiculous. But I mean, that's the whole sense of the vulnerability to psychology. And then you talk about Hotzah Shemra, which, by the way, appears also in Dvorah. That's exactly what it says, Vayit Chazek, which Chazal say means, Chizku alai divrechem. You take a look at the end, which the Navi talks to Yisrael with the ultimate protection of Yisrael, is first called Kli Yutzar alayach lo titzar. So they'll make nuclear weapons to blow you off the face of the earth. It won't work against you. And Kol Peh, that's an even bigger Madriya. That is Kam Tashi is going to be wiped out. And you see today, what is the fight against Yisrael? That's what it is. It's language. It's all about language, media, Amalek. That becomes the end of this parasha also. It's an extension of the aspects of Milchama, of Kivush. So the sexual, agricultural, the cultural, even in terms of the dress elements of Kilayim become exactly the same. If you want to understand the nature of your own being, it's to be found. To be is to be nimtza. To be botse, the Avedah. The ability to be tse, or to be something that is found always within a spatial context, which of course ends up being Ma'aser Bereshis itself. That's why Shabbos is only about space, right? All the mitzvahs of Shabbos are about space. It's there that we learn the concept of Rishuyas Bechlo. And that means if we take a look, we relate the parshas from the beginning of Eikev, where they don't begin with Ptuchot. So the first we have that reality of mitzvahs, in which you cannot start putting your own take onto a mitzvah. That's the whole concept of Eikev. And then the nature of space and choice in Re'eh. Then the creation of the support systems to maintain that space, which are the road systems, the literally not simply roads in terms of infrastructure for commerce, but roads in terms of ritzicha and responsibility, social responsibility, mishpat, and everything else that was there. Then the context of that space and extending its envelope, because that's the idea of Yitzhak, is that you extend. That's the Milchemes HaRishos. So the fact that even a single mitzvah can draw you into that means that doing that one mitzvah can uplift you in ways that you would never have imagined. And you find yourself in a different world. That's the idea of mitzvah, goreret mitzvah. And that is something that we tend to ignore, and it's the mocker of the wonderful, there's such a beautiful Zohar Chadash that understands the whole mitzvah of Yifas Torah in what appears to be a metaphorical way, and which is really the most profound insight into how personally it affects you. And the Zohar says like this, and it's very much it's an extension of the beautiful Hakdama of Rabbeinu Bachya, and Rabbeinu Bachya says that the aspect of this parasha is Tna b'ni libcha li ve'einecha darki tetzorah. If you give me your heart, you give me your eyes, how you look and how you react to things. If you give them to me, then everything's going to be perfect. But without that, you keep yourself separate. You keep yourself out of the space, and you attempt to distance things, to intellectualize things, to keep them at a hand's breadth. And you will never share with me your innermost responses to things. And that is the secret. And that's the pshat. Once you do this, if you give that to me, you're mine. And the end is it's going to work out perfectly. But ilo, let that believe. Not it's not going to work out. So the Zohar says this beautiful, beautiful pshat. Ki tezei milchama al oivecha. Who is oivecha? The biggest oyev that you have is your own Yetzer Hara, who basically hates your success as a human. Because as a human, you're not that reptile. And that Yetzer Hara is essentially built around your evolution from that Nachash, ultimately, right? And that's the Imra'av Sona'acha. That's your Sona, your ultimate Sona. Ve'alda ki tetzei la milchama al oivecha do yu Yetzer Hara. that means you sense that you have an enemy within. So that means the only way to defeat this enemy is by that type of yitzia, which attracts the Yifastar, which is, again, that's that cheshek, that's that wave. The anan tzrichen lemefek lekable b'milin dioraita. You have to come to him with the words of the Torah, which is Torah's taplin liyetzara, because that provides you, that's that vision. The space exists there. That's hadvarim asher ra'u einecha. Bentishkach hadvarim asher ra'u einecha. We define the space by hadvarim asher ra'u einecha. Not the intellectualization of it, but rather the reconstruction of the totality of the awareness. So then, and the Yitzhak will be given into your hands. As it says, you'll get everything that you can out of those drives to creativity, but they'll be yours. You will take them as captives. And the Eshet Yefatar is your own neshama. Eshet Yefatar is the most beautiful things within you. So you find yourself in love so often, so full of cheshek for things which, if you're really the total schmuck that you think you are, you wouldn't be in love with those things. So that means that there's something incredible about you. It's the same identification, la'avdil, as identifying Shchen ben Chamor as being, there's got to be a Reb Hanania ben Dradian in there, that's unbelievable. Someone who's ready to be Beiser, his nefesh, be burned to the Sefer Torah in order to be Malam Torah. And then to recognize, I'm not sure that I'm Zecher Olam Haba, because maybe it's all selfish. Amazing degree of awareness and cheshek and honesty and love and so on. Unbelievable. Mamish unbelievable. So that's got to be inside of you. How come you have so much cheshek? You say, well, only once in a while. But then it's always only once in a while. Where is it coming from? So that Yefastar, that's your own neshama. That's the Isha Yirat Hashem Ititala. That's exactly what we're talking about. So then Esirat Simlat Shivya, take off the filthy clothing. Take off all of the filth that's in you. So all of these Zinin Bishin that come from the Chov of the Egel Azov, and that's why we come to Yom Kippurim, obviously, with this. Ubachtat Avia Vet Ima Yerach Yamim. That's referring to the month of Elul. Dahi Yarcha de Elul. The buzz salik marshal tur legoy rachme kamik v'chabrich. Ubachta et avia v'etima yerach yami. Who do we cry for? We cry for our father and our mother, because after all, we've been screwing around with them. And this is basically the galek naf avicha. Because what we do is we take advantage of the Torah, we take advantage of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is essentially arayot. So this is the Ervat Avicha, Ervat Imcha, Lo Tigaleh. I mean, what do you think? Ervat Avicha is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ervat Imecha is the Torah, and all you do is screw around with them. So you make up a religion, and now you make yourself feel good about that religion. So what is that if not rape, essentially? So that's the Bachta. And because of this, we were so distant from HaKadosh Baruch Hu the entire time. Ad Yom Kippur. From the end of that Bachtat Avia Vetima, at that time, he's Dabka Malka B'Matunisa, and that's why it says, V'achar kach tavo eleo uve'alta v'ayta lecha leisha. So you reconnect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, reconnect to your own neshama, reconnect to the cheshek, and reconnect to the leiv of ten bincha libcha li. So the entire period is tremendously demanding, which is why it's part of this Re'etarei. It's a change in levels of awareness. It's a change in how it is that you want to relate to reality overall, instead of breaking it up into the logical structures that you're used to. And instead of thinking that it's supposed to be understandable instead of holistic, and with levels of relationships that are mind-boggling complex, which even simple physical reality is that way. I mean, you look at the simplest phenomena from just a physical point of view, and it's so insanely, mind-bogglingly complex that the thought of the ability to interrelate all of it in terms of the Vayachula Shamayim V'Aretz V'Chol Tzva'am is just on any level insanely complex. So you only deal with it by grappling with some level of re'iyah that gives you iconic shortcuts. And basically that's what the Torah is giving you, iconic shortcuts. So you can understand this mitzvah. You'll spend your whole life trying to understand the details. Yes, maybe of one taste, so what? And if somebody wants to understand the synapses of one worm, it doesn't take him a lifetime of research. And one fruit fly takes him a lifetime of research, so what? But that research provides you the sense of what you're dealing with in the entirety of the picture. And somebody who hasn't done that has no sense of what it's about at all. He's like an infant in the world, has no idea of how unbelievably powerful the tiniest little aspect of things are. Because he doesn't live in that space. He's not part of the world. It's vihitalapta, literally. He's just invisible. You walk down the street and a person like that is invisible to you because he's barely there. I mean, you see right away, there's no one at home. And when you meet the rare person who has that cheshek, there's an immediate desire to do something. Well, I want to do something for that cheshek. I want to love you back. I want to bring you into a space where you could discover why you feel this way. Because I know if I walk by you and I don't react, you may never know. And you'll go to your grave without ever understanding why you want it so much more and how it never became anything. There's no greater tragedy. So that idea of the Yitzia, the Milchama, and the Kivush, which is the Rambam brings, in terms of the Hilchas Yifas Torah, that is our mitzvah to go out and to bring a level of humanity to the entire world, which is good enough if it's Sheva B'Tzidulei. So it's human, so you're connected, so you know how to be part of this world. That much we have to give you. And not to do that, not to have that sense of responsibility or desire or love or connection or cheshek or lave or any level that you want to call it, that aspect of a re'iyah that leads to all of this, is a tremendous, tremendous tragedy and a violation of the most fundamental responsibilities of literal tsar b'alei chayim. So the Rishonim talk this out, the relationship of v'nikla achicha le'enecha and lo tachsam shor b'disho. In a deeper sense, is this point. You have to be sensitive to an animal's pain at the work it's doing for you. You see another human being who has been turned into an animal, essentially. And you have no feelings for that? You don't understand there's a responsibility for that? And you walk down the street and you see an entire world of madness, and you don't care? Because what? Because it isn't part of your machana? You don't even have a machana then. Can't deal with it. So this aspect of Vayamachanecha Kadosh is part of your ability to survive yourself. You're not doing anybody any favors. You're creating a world.
Sounds like that my avoid and cheshek requires sensitivity to the other person's life.
Absolutely. Right. And otherwise, there's nothing to be cheshek to.
I mean, the Ramban, I think he's quoting the Ramban about Mishloach Haken, saying that the mother bird feels the same exact way that a human feels.
Yeah, the Rambam says
that. Right. So and we have to, and our mitzvah is to be sensitive to that. And it's our cheshek with that animal.
Yes, absolutely. Very, very true.
So here we're talking about the transformation of Tava into Cheshek.
Right. Tava into Cheshek, Kivush into human terraforming. It's literally the opposite of the dirty word to subdue, and to make use of, and to steal, and to rape. And that's why it's all mavuzos on the same things. Respect for integrity, respect for genetic integrity, respect for the continued involvement in the process of reproduction, even to the point of genital organs. And it's just unbelievable when you see that. I mean, people walk by these mitzvahs, they're crazy mitzvahs. The putting of Petzua Daka before Mamzer is crazy. To make it an Isra L'bo B'Kal is crazy. And Bris Milah isn't crazy. And the sign of your connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu I mean, it's, we're so used to it that we don't understand how weird it is. It's totally, from a Western perspective, it's like sick. But it's the only thing that's bringing out the reality of what the struggle is. And this is that milchama that goes back to that original Loyat Bashasha, which is taking existence as being real. This world, it really is Bishvil Chabarati. And when you look at anything, you should be just always facing the reality of you are looking at nothing but continued evolution. That's all you're looking at. You're looking at a virtual reality that only provides for continued growth into some type of reality that you're going to form. And everything else isn't even there. It takes so long to discover this. It isn't even there. So it isn't even there to such an extent that the things that you think are the way to discover what is there are nothing more than looking at the virtual reality more closely. In other words, you create an entire reality, which is essentially nothing but a user interface. Right? So now you want to discover, and what is the real meaning of that reality? Let me look at it under a microscope. So now I discover that there are, oh my gosh, quarks. That's like looking at your screen and discovering, oh my gosh, there's pixels. There's absolutely no meaning. It was just pixels, because that's how you created your graphic user interface. So to say now quarks are more directly reality, there's no connection to an underlying reality. They're the ingredients of the virtual reality. But what is that virtual reality reflecting? God only knows. Because we're not talking about intellectual things. We're talking about the smell of coffee. We're talking about being in love. What is that? We're talking about the color of your shirt. What is that color? It has no relationship to anything. You're telling me that it's the way that my eyes respond to a certain wavelength of light, which isn't even really true because it's a construct of the various different parts of my retina that are being stimulated in different degrees by mixtures that are in that shirt and blah, 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 right? I mean, there's nothing at all. So what are you going to do now? Look more closely at that. So now let's take apart the retina. Fine. So we discover how many rods and codes we have. Now we're closer to understanding what that is that I'm looking at with that color. And I'm understanding what my vision is and my awareness is and my thoughts of tshuva and my desire to go to nothing, not even touching on it. Maybe it has nothing to do with anything that we think it has to do with. Nothing at all. So the entire structure was a complete and total ridiculous structure that we imposed on things, which come from some spatial interrelationships that are so totally beyond us in terms of no maglotel, that we were idiots in thinking that we could even come to an approximation of what it's about. Why should we even think such a thing, right?
So that's the Ramchal speaks up with the bush of having time when you didn't work for it, means that you don't exist really in that space unless you actually.
Yes, okay, that's true. Of course, that's true. It's a totally salamta. I mean, he's focusing on a different aspect, but it's definitely a beautiful extension of that idea. But I'm trying to bring out something that people have a very hard time with. Because no matter what you do, they keep believing things like, since I experienced this, it must be my brain is creating that experience. What makes you think it has anything to do with your brain? The experience. The brain is an agent that is able to process things. And what does that have to do with the experience? Let's call it a vast adding machine, a computer. You believe your computer is experiencing the smell of coffee. If you provide it the correct sensual data, it experiences the smell of coffee. You don't think it for a minute. Okay, so what makes you think that the experience of the smell of coffee has something to do with the processing of your brain? Maybe it's coming from somewhere else entirely. Maybe the whole thing is like a complete and total misconception. And you've read even that into reality.
So maybe saying that there's a perception, that sense of whatever's given in reality is the platform for continued evolution.
I'm saying that's the minimum thing that you see. You look out of a window and you're just absolutely shocked. Look at this entire thing that is inside of my head, that I have no clue as to what it is. And all my relationship to it is by this experience that I'm having of this beautiful ocean outside my window, or whatever the other things are. And I'm going to assume that it's just there. And now I walk out and it provides a nice stage for the things that I have fun doing. I mean, you must be mad. It's a complete and total breakdown of the most fundamental nature of experience. It's just that we get so used to it that we build on it as if it's real. But anybody who attempts to avoid getting dragged into this is what's called the ego, essentially. Projections. You want to avoid going by those projections, then you are shocked by everything that you see. What the heck is that? What am I experiencing? And it becomes so clear to you. It's not an article of faith that you see there is nothing else. So what are you doing? It's the ultimate lo yitboshashu. I take for granted this, yeah, of course, things are there. No, things are not there. Why would they be there? What do you call being there? So all of that mitziut, nimtza, the mitzia of the Avedah, or the Yitzia, or even seatecha and motzaz vatecha, all of these plays on words that the parsha is playing with. It's playing with our minds here, the parsha, in trying to get us to at least jump into the recognition of what things are really going on. They're not items there, in the same way that we've discovered even in terms of simple physical reality. There are no items. They're interrelationships of forces. So you're able to look at this table as the interrelationship of forces, in which there's no discrete thing in the universe at all. And that's a simple fact of physics. And now take the next steps and imagine how complex things are. So all of these silly assumptions are the assumptions of reptiles, not of fully developed humans. They're just things that you take for granted because a reptilian brain and an early cerebral cortex is feeding you information. And it's easy to iconize it in such a way that you're able to just play with it. Like an infant, literally like an infant. That sees nothing else but an extension of its own self, and that's all that there is. Mommy's breasts, which are there to feed me, and everybody around me, and giving me the support that I need. They're not really everybody, they're the extensions that are there for me. That's how you look at the world. Totally infantile.
When it tastes sugar for the first time. Because until that stage, it's actually taking something that it only takes things that it actually does need. So it's more like an animal that it's actually.
Yeah, you see that. That's
when
the
you start
first
getting
reaction.
sugar,
Yeah.
and you're sensitive to the
The Gemara
recognition.
says that. The Gemara says it's green.
Green.
Grain.
Grain.
Grain. The first exposure to grain, right, becomes the exposure to the ability to ultimately to think. That's enatina como abba ve'ima. Okay, in any event, gentlemen, this is rather complex stuff, a little bit mind-boggling, but hopefully it gives us the insights into what is meant by a parsha of Machana, Bekirbecha, inside you. And that's what it is. It's Bekerev Machanech. It's inside of you. And that's what has to be learned in order to be able to live in a space that allows for tshuva, and for growth, and for an honest being uplifted through no agency of your own, but through hanging on to that mitzvah into a completely new reality. Thanks for holding on until now. Let's see. I hope so, everyone.
So we talked a lot of things.
I did briefly.
Oh, wow.
But that's not beneath income.
We're around the issue of new.
He talks about the issues.
I know, it's already.
Oh, I did. I've been talking the whole time about the way that chesed replaces znut ultimately. Even if that chesed is used for znut. In other words, at an early stage of development, you will confuse ta'ava with chesed. So that there could be infatuation that you use to justify your taivas and so on and so forth. But when the point comes that ta'ava is an actual turn off, and the only thing that you relate to is cheshek, you've been brought to a stage in which you utilize and were kovesh, and that's exactly what the Rabbeinu Bachya talks about, and that's what the Zohar is talking about. Yuvi vishavita shivyon. Obviously, you needed to go through those infantile stages in which whatever Freudian elements of desire and so on, and relating to father and mother exactly as the rapist and so on, that the Zohar is talking about, those are simple Freudian ideas that the Zohar takes for granted. You utilize those taiva issues into growing cheshek. And if you work that out into a vision and into a sense of where you are, then it cures you in ways that you'd never believe were possible. You thought you were stuck, and you weren't. Actually, you were being drawn along in ways that you barely could believe were possible, such that Sof turned out to be something that only made a little show in you when you were young. And that only came out once a year, maybe. It is a strange sense of desire that is deeper than just the simple taiva. And it grew and it grew and it grew. But it required your building on it. And that was the sense of willingness. Give your heart to it. And those who try to protect their heart, that's part of Western civilization. Protect, protect, protect. So it's the very protection that makes it impossible to ever give your heart to anything. And therefore you can't have chesed. I mean, the insanity of not willing to risk sexual abuse is a fantastic example. But because I will not risk sexual abuse, therefore I cannot have chesed. It's literally the centerpiece of modern Western civilization. No, it's all about rape. It's all about somebody speaking to me in the wrong way, not being macabre and being correct. I mean, it's beyond
On the
belief.
other hand, you have a celebration of things that are counter to Shabbos Yitzhara, like homosexuality and things like that.
No, exactly.
Which is
But
also
not because because of type.
That's right, because once it's taiva, then it doesn't really make a difference anymore what it is.
That's exactly the
what the
feeling.
object is.
Yeah.
Right.
So what's the difference? The object is a horse, the object is a man, the object is what is exactly the same object. So because of that, I have to respect it. If I respect my own objects, why wouldn't I respect his horse and his zebra? Exactly the same thing, and they're 100% right. It is exactly the same thing, but sugar that makes enough community. It really makes it enough.
How does this relate to the mitzvah achas, where we talk about initially? Mitzvah achas, do Shmuel, we should know.
Because those are objects that are part of a reality that you are not aware of. And your willingness to risk yourself. That's the whole thing. You know what people measure mitzvahs with now? Forget about schar. Forget about akev. Comfort. Am I comfortable with the mitzvah? Which is by definition the complete and total bizui of any possibility of mitzvah. Because the mitzvah is there to serve me. It can't possibly take, because by definition, if something is taking me into another reality, it has to be with discomfort. The greater the discomfort, the greater the ability to see something I've never been able to see before. right? So such that the ultimate tikkun is the ultimate discomfort. I mean, that's the story of Rebbe Elazar ben Durdaya. You really want to get away from sexual, what do they call it, addiction. So he was a sex addict, right? So Gemara says the only way out was so painful that he died. And there was nothing to do about it. Kol ba'el lo yashuvon. Even though that's said about wave, not about enai, but once you're avik, it's the same thing. So why does it have to be so painful? Because you're ripping yourself to shreds.
In other words, the connection over here to that greater vision is the vision we can't really
Great what?
see. The connection to the greater vision over here of Kishore is the connection to a vision that we can't perceive logically. We have to connect to something.
That's the no maglotel. Don't attempt to measure it linearly.
Part of a bigger picture by not attempting to perceive. Not by
Yeah, right. I mean, but
expanding.
that's true even on the simplest level of Torah. That's before you've processed it. And you spend your whole life processing, whatever extent you can. Which is what we do with nature also. We spend millions and millions of lives processing it to figure out why it looks one way and it really is another way, right? And, you know, as I never tire of pointing out, every single time you decide you know something, it has always been wrong throughout history. Not one time was anything ever right. And that doesn't lead people to suspect that maybe, you know, there should be a different way of dealing with the reality. Every theory was always wrong. It's unbelievable. Things that people worshipped for centuries upon centuries had no real meaning. You know, it may turn out to be right within a very small, yes, Euclidean geometry is right. If you happen to be in a three-dimensional space in a universe which is flat, et cetera, you know, yeah. So once upon a time you could be killed for saying something like that, literally killed. Wait a minute, it's not absolute truth? What does absolute truth mean about three-dimensional space? Are you nuts? Once upon a time, this was absolute truth. You don't believe in absolute truth?
It meant
That's just
another reality
yes.
with other laws and other rules, which was too threatening.
Yeah, I mean, it's a small piece of reality. Yes, you can imagine a universe which is really Euclidean, you know, or which for all intents and purposes Euclidean and things like that. And the same thing is true of everything. Yes, you can imagine a gravity that's Newtonian until you become a little bit too sensitive. Once you become sensitive, you see, something's wrong. It ain't working. So then, okay, then you learn your next lesson. But then you end up with a breakdown between gravity and quantum mechanics. Now you need a new lesson. And this goes on and on and on. You're never, ever right. You're just seeing a tiny piece of things which you could have sworn was like the end and be all.
But you could choose to not to live in that reality. You could choose to live in a world where only Newtonian physics is important.
Yeah, fine.
And you may be making it, you may
That's
be maybe a mistake.
postmodernism.
Meaning the Newtonian physics which says that if I drive over this bridge, the bridge is not going to fall down, and that's all I care about. You know, I don't care about what's going on. You know,
Right, okay, but then you're mitalim from the nature of reality that you're trying to be part of.
It reminds me of your last part.
I mean, that's what people
I
do.
don't care.
But that's what people do with mitzvahs. It's exactly like that. They create this insane Judaism, which I mean, has no meaning, literally no meaning. Who cares? You know, and then they go around being makar of people to it. You know, just like that. You know, like who cares? What exactly are they achieving? It's unbelievable. But it becomes like, wow, all self-congratulatory, all totally meaningless. And persuade themselves that Kadosh Baruch Hu is right there, holding their right arms, making sure that everything works. Where? What? Who told you any of these things? But it's convenient. So it's convenient, it's comfortable, and you certainly don't expect me to go, you know, look into the possibility of evolution now, do you? I mean, that, or Chas v'Shalom own an iPad. I'm saying it sounds crazy, but I mean, this is literally the kind of things that people are worried about. I mean, they're fighting, you know, 2-century-old battles. It's nutty. Daf Yomi from the Kibbutz Lavi, Beis HaMedrash. It was all Kvutza of Ger. Hasidim, Ger Hasidim over there. So I have this iPad there, and the whole shir is in the iPad because you have it over there, right? So like everything's like, who's he talking to? Who's talking to him? They come around and you saw their faces, and what? There's a whole different reality in this little. It's only a piece of paper, and there's all. Where did it come from? It's like literally watching a different planet. The person comes around. So afterwards, one of these guys comes over to me. He says, "So you can do good things with this." אפשר לעשות בזה דברים טובים. You should only know, besides having, call it kula, anything that you want to know, a minor thing, you can also have a shir over it. What a miracle. What a miracle. Speaking of virtual realities.
Where, since this whole Mahalat is built off the order of the Parsha, where does the mitzvah mamzer come in? Or the mention of mamzer fit into
Because this is the whole point. The point is that the structure of kivush is a long-term vision of where the world ultimately gets to. Every violation of genetic integrity, which is true even from the point of view of the gene pool itself, from the simple level, simple physical level, the DNA level, is a violation of kibush in the deepest sense. Of course it's there. But the linkage of it to genitals is what's shocking, not the presence of mamzer.
Mish's example in Tanis of when they're fasting for rain, so Mish says they would say Divrei Kivushin. And Mish says, what would they say? They would say, like, the sackcloth that you're wearing and the ripping of the tearing of the clothes, that's not what, it's the tshuva and it's the action. That's called Divrei Kivushin. You need not to get lost in the external.
Beautiful. Elements of kibush.
How does the idea of
the relationship of woman to snakes. Right, it's the same language, right? The betach hatat robet. Right, that's teshukah. It's not. This is something different. Look, it's a very beautiful thing, but it requires a whole shir. That's an excellent question. Well, he's asking the relationship between cheshek and teshukah. So why do we talk about a lecha teshukato in terms of the Yetzirah and teshukatech in terms of Isha? And it obviously relates to this whole idea, the interconnectedness, right? Which is the atatim shol ba, atatim shol bo. In both cases, it's word for word. I mean, that's the reason that Chava is called Chava after the Chivya. It's the same lotion that said about the Yetzer. Which is the words that are said to the Nachash are said to Kishamata B'Kol Ishtecha, which is the function of language originally. It's what created, what's that?
To speak,
Mechavot in Hebrew.
Or no, in Aramaic.
Means to point, no?
Yeah, it means more pointing.
Like I was saying over this and that.
Mhm. Not that I can think of, maybe I'm just not thinking of it right now. But the entire thing begins with language. Kriya Shemas, which goes on in the end to Lord. Anyway, but it's too much, as you can see. In Bereshis. We'll get to Bereshis. Maybe we'll be able to deal with it there. Coming up soon, hopefully. Senor, I see you.
Yes, Rabbi. Thank you.
Good having you in our best of Edrich.
Well, thank you. Great being here, believe me. Wonderful. Okay, Rabbi. Have a good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
It's coming.